Welcome back, everyone. The Sydney Opera House is certainly Australia's most iconic piece of architecture, and I'm sure that, like me, when you think of the Opera House, you probably think of the physical building. But what happens when what usually happens inside that building, that very physical business of performing on a stage, can no longer happen inside? It turns out that something pretty amazing happens. So I'm really delighted to introduce you to Stuart Bunchanan as our next keynote speaker. As Head of Digital Programming for Sydney Opera House, Stuart is responsible for leading and curating the house's year-round digital program, delivering live streams and recordings direct from the stage, along with new digital presentations, innovative commissions, and online education initiatives. Following the success of the award-winning 2020 digital season From Our House to Yours, Stuart drove the launch of the house's online streaming platform, Stream, which showcases a broad range of world-class performing and digital arts, with new works released every month. Just before I hand over to Stuart, a reminder to please post your questions for Stuart in the chat, in the question area using the Submit a Question button as you think of them. And over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Kate, for your introduction. I want to begin today by acknowledging the Darug people, traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking to you here today. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and also extend that to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Despite my background, I'm not actually at the Opera House. I'm coming to you from Blue Mountains outside Sydney. So the presentation that I'm talking to today is called From Stage to Stream. And as Kate mentioned, giving you a little bit of a background into what we do in the digital programming team at the Opera House. I wanted us to start with this definition of digital, because it's one that I've certainly used and referred to many times, and it's relevant to the work that we're doing. Now, obviously, people define digital in lots of different ways, in much the same way, I guess, as they define digital transformation in lots of different ways. So with this, I just wanted to, I think this is really clarifying that this was written by Tom Loosemore a couple of years ago. If you haven't seen it before, it talks about that idea of digital applying culture, process, and business models and technologies of the internet to respond to people's raised expectations. There's a lot in that, and I'm going to unpack some of that as we go through. But a couple of things to bear in mind, and particularly that last moment about people's raised expectations. And it's a reminder about who we're doing this transformation for. And all the things that go into it that are not technology. You'll notice the first three things there: culture, process, business models. None of those are related to platforms or infrastructure or technology itself. So let's swing back to that a little bit later. But let's look at the house. And as I was thinking about how we've gone through the digital transformation of the Opera House over the last 10 years, it's really gone through these three stages or phases to recalibrate, redesign, and reimagine. And I'm going to go through each of these three phases and tell you a little bit about the digital program as it relates to those. And you'll see as we go through that it is a chronology that we started off, I think, in the same place as everybody does, insofar as recalibrating our offer, and then moving into that sort of redesign phase where we're thinking about things from the ground up in a different way. And then how it opens the doors to reimagining with a very clean sheet of paper, if you like. So let's start with that first one, that idea of recalibrating. And when I think about recalibrating, I think about access, or I think about format shifting. I think about taking something that didn't previously work on the internet, if you like, and recalibrating it such that it does. Okay, so when digital transformation, I guess, began many years ago, that was as simple as format shifting, taking something that was hitherto analog and making it digital. So what's important about this stage is that the thing itself, whatever it is that we're talking about, it doesn't fundamentally change. The thing doesn't change, but we change the way in which we present it. And so, for example, let's take a look at this. This is the Flaming Lips, amazing band in the United States. Here they are in concert mode in the wonderful concert hall at Sydney Opera House. They specialise in these wonderful giant inflatable balloons and so on. It's a very colourful show. But there's an example of us recalibrating by pointing the cameras at the stage, bringing the cameras into the concert hall, pointing them at the stage, and simply filming or live streaming that which is on stage at that time. So again, not changing what is on stage, but we are improving the sort of access insofar as people who can't attend the concert due to distance, due to mobility, due to price, due to a whole range of factors, that we've are able to make this concert available to many more people simply by pointing cameras at what's happening. But the show itself didn't change. In fact, whether the band were aware of the cameras being there is another question entirely. And it's not just music concerts that we do. This is a photograph of Dance Rise, which is our annual First Nations dance competition that takes place on the forecourt. And this is, again, a case of us taking an existing event and taking a camera crew and live streaming, filming what's happening there on site. This is a wonderful project, a wonderful initiative that brings this terrific work of dance rights to a much broader audience. Now, dance rights is very special because what happens here is that groups from communities all over Australia, many from remote areas, travel to Sydney to perform dances that often have never been seen outside of country. So it's a terrific way, not just for the folks who are sitting there on the steps outside the Opera House, but by recalibrating the way that we do things to simply record and live stream that as well. And then we look at podcasting as well. So not just about filming. So whilst we're pointing the cameras at the stage, we're also taking an audio feed, obviously, of what's being presented on stage. And we will take those recordings and make them available as podcasts. Our most popular podcast is called Ideas at the House. We probably have around about 100,000 listens a year on that series. And it's literally just straight verbatim recordings of works that have already been presented. This is a photo of Tamika Mallory in 2017, who was one of the organizers of the Women's March on Washington back in 2017. That sort of very large, you'll recall that sort of large protest that occurred outside the Capitol, protesting Trump in 2017. So those three examples that I gave you there, just simply recalibrating that which already happens. The source material, if you like, doesn't fundamentally change. The way we do things doesn't necessarily change that radically. But we are doing, we're addressing the facet of the Opera House's artistic strategy that talks to digital. And I'll just tell you what that is. So within the artistic strategy of the Opera House, we look to use digital technology and content to share performances with the world and to bring the world's art to Opera House audiences. So pretty straightforward when you unpack that, to use technology to share performances. And that's basically what we've just done, right? We've used technology insofar as the infrastructure of cameras and live stream infrastructure to bring those performances and events to audiences. And traditionally that was done through YouTube and or Facebook. But there's nothing particularly radical in that. So the next phase, I guess, of digital transformation is not simply recalibrating or format shifting, but actually looking to redesign the thing itself. Okay, it's taking new creative approaches, looking at what new opportunities digital might offer. Okay, so looking at things as we're going through that process of format shifting, let's say, taking advantage of new features, new functions, new opportunities as they may arise. A couple of examples of this would be the Opera House's digital creative learning program. Now, digital creative learning is actually something of a Trojan horse for digital programming, in that it was the very first thing that we did within this space. And probably now I think about 11 or 12 years ago. So we've been doing digital creative learning for quite some time. And what's special about digital creative learning is that it's not simply live streaming shows that are on stage, those things that we just discussed in that first section. But here we're moving into a more interactive phase. So we have presenters on site. You can see the chap on the screen there in the background. We have presenters on site engaging directly with kids in the classroom. So they'll be in one of the venues of the house. They'll be talking to a camera, and on the top of the camera, we'll actually see very small screens that are showing them the kids in the classroom. So they're picking up the webcam of the kids in the classroom. So the presenters can see all the kids in the classroom. Normally, we would do 2 or 3 classes for any one workshop. So the presenter is able to see the different schools that are there and talk to each class one-on-one. Now, as I say, we've been running this for quite some time. I think in any given year, we do about 80 or 90 different sessions that include workshops like this. We also do interactive tours, which is very same format, but instead of standing in one position, doing a workshop, which might be theatre or dance or creative play, is actually going around the house and doing a little bit of a tour and introducing kids in the classroom to some of the exciting places and spaces around the house. Last year, we delivered this program to about 4,000 schools, about 160,000 students, all attending remotely and all doing that free. So this program is entirely subsidized. Where we're looking though in the future is, I guess, the shifting demand for on-demand delivery. So whilst the interactive component is really important for a lot of schools, similarly, there's a lot of schools who say, well, the interactivity is less important. I just want to be able to do it whatever time of day I want to do it at. So currently we run usually in any given day, let's say 3 at 10:30 and 12 and 1:30. You want to be able to do those on different days at different times. So we're looking at complementing this live with an on-demand pre-recorded model as well. The other aspect of redesign that I think is very much top of mind is something that Kate mentioned right at the top, which is our From Our House to Yours program. So when we had to close for the pandemic last March 2020, we looked to essentially digital programming to ensure that the lights from the house were kept on. I found myself in a very curious position because I had only been a few months in the job, and I delivered the digital programming strategy for the organization in February, not even knowing there was a pandemic around the corner. And then the doors closed and suddenly it was all eyes on digital programming. And fortunately, we had that strategy and that roadmap there that we expected to roll out in 2 years, and we ended up rolling out in 2 months. So From Our House to Yours, we, as you can see there from that photo, we took the Jones Sutherland Theatre, we pointed cameras at the stage, and we brought in artists to live stream some shows, but not in front of an audience, which was a very weird experience for a lot of artists. Some artists quite liked the experience and kind of, it was quite novel for them. And a few artists they didn't like that experience at all, and understandably so. We did about 50 events across the period of closure, which I think was 6 months. And as I say, it's a pretty straightforward replica of a live show, and even a kind of replica of like an opera house week by week calendar. So we were having things on, Friday at 8 o'clock, Saturday at matinee, and so on. So it was in lockstep with expectations of what a live calendar would look like. But what was exciting about it was that across that time, it allowed us to test a whole bunch of things we'd never done before. A huge variety of different kind of programming and production approaches. We were also looking at how the audience was responding, looking at things that they liked and didn't like, and sort of diving into that feedback. Some of the interesting things that we discovered through doing this was that when we were doing this sort of survey and number crunching at the end of it, the average age of the audience was about 10 years younger than the standard opera house audience. So that was really interesting for us. So it sort of showed that digital programming skews a little younger than the core opera house audience. And for those that were surveyed, more than a quarter of them had either not been to the house in the last year or had never been to the house at all. So there was certainly a good number of new audiences, introducing new audiences to the house. And that's kind of also now how we start to think of the digital program as essentially an audience development exercise, as much as it is, if you like, servicing our current audience by doing all the things that we discussed earlier in terms of providing access. By doing that, we're also introducing new audiences to the house, people who had hitherto not considered the Opera House potentially as something that was for them. One of the biggest challenges we face is that people will expect the Opera House to be high art, very classical art, classical music and ballet and opera, whereas that's probably about 50% of what we do. We do everything from all other art forms, contemporary music and comedy and cabaret and regular theatre and so on. So the Opera House covers all genres and art forms. The other aspect to it, I guess, is that it really sort of accelerated, I guess, the public perception of the digital program at the Opera House. There's about 5 million views on YouTube across the whole series, which really took us by surprise. It's terrific success, but it definitely put us there as a consideration where, as I say, it hadn't been before. Which sort of leads us to the last part, which is this idea of reimagining. So rather than simply looking at the new opportunities that digital might provide, a reimagination is essentially fundamentally transforming the core practice. Because remember in that first part I talked about, well, the thing on stage didn't necessarily change when we pointed the cameras at it. But now we're sort of at that phase of digital transformation where we are fundamentally changing that which is on stage in order to take advantage of everything that digital has to offer. Our core practice, our core business models are now shifting. And here's a couple of examples. This is one, a film we shot earlier this year with the amazing Indigenous artist, musician Ziggy Ramo, and his new version of Paul Kelly's From Little Things, which he performed, as you can see, on top of the Opera House. And I show this one as an example of now us creating films that are not simply extensions of what has happened on stage, but actually presenting work that is designed exclusively for screen. There's no on-stage component to this work. It's not, we're not presenting this because Ziggy has a show to promote at the Opera House. This is us now moving into screen-based programming and partnering, therefore, with the broader film, TV, and screen sector in ways that we haven't done before. And I think that's one of the kind of interesting upticks of the pandemic, is that for all that it has wrought devastation on the entertainment sector, working in film, TV, and screen, we're all now looking to that sector to help us develop digital programs. I guess Ziggy is also another good example of us using digital to onboard an increasing range of new emerging artists, perhaps artists that we hadn't been able to work with before, which is really exciting as well. And then we sort of take it another stage further. This is an image from our Outlines program, where we don't so much talk about digital as let's say a platform, but talk about digital as a practice in performing arts. And what I mean about that is artists working with digital to create works explicitly for this format. What you're seeing here is work that was presented earlier this year. It's called Apotheosis. This is a movement artist, Lydia Kevala. The designer in the project was the wonderful Serwa Adafua from Western Sydney. And this is Lydia in motion capture gear, and the work that she's doing on stage, as you can see, is rendered in real time on screen behind her. And there was an audience in the room while this happened, and it was a sensational work and quite unlike anything that we've presented at the house before, and excited about where this particular practice is taking us. It's the idea, I guess, of delivering work, delivering the performing arts rather, in ways that are new and innovative, and working with artists to rethink their practice, to rethink what's possible, rather than just thinking, I'm going to make a film or I'm going to come out on stage and be live streamed. how does digital fundamentally change what they do? And this is an example. This is the first time that Lydia and Serwa had worked in this medium before. And I guess just the slight extension of that is that we're also now looking at how this type of work can bleed out into our schools program. Have, for example, we've got a new workshop happening next year, delivered through that interactive workshop program that I outlined earlier, which is called creating music videos with motion capture. So, taking that idea of digital as practice and moving it into the schools program. And then finally, Stream. We discovered, I guess, through that From Our House to Yours program that I talked about earlier, and of course, now with all this additional work that we're doing, that there is a huge appetite for the digital program, that audience expectations are evolving, that the appetite for watching the arts on screen is a long-term one, that artists and their agents and managers and everybody involved, their understanding of what it means to present work for digital is also evolving. And this idea of kind of hybrid or extended works. These are all the sorts of discussions that we're having now. So the idea of taking what we're doing and presenting it in a streaming platform actually felt like a logical extension. We worked with Vimeo, who a lot of you may know, as a video provider, to create this stream platform. And essentially the idea is, how do we present everything we've just been talking about, but do it in a way that feels very familiar for folks at home? And so Stream behaves in the same way as Netflix or Stan or ABC iView. It looks the same, it feels the same. And we're just about to launch this is currently all available online, but we're just about to launch our app for Apple TV and Android and Telstra TV. So we'll literally sit next to Netflix on your TV and have access to all this great work that we're making here. The other thing that this has allowed us to do, and this talks about a fundamental change to the business model, is a lot of the work you see here is free, but we can also charge pay-per-view for this as well. So some of the works that you'll see on Stream are ticketed. I think since we launched Stream just about a year ago, we've had about 30 ticketed live stream sessions and have sold about 10,000 tickets for those across those events. So we're very happy with that result. We've got about 12,000 subscribers as well to the free platform. So very excited about where that's going. And I just wanted to finish up by returning to this slide that we started at the top. Oops, sorry. The slide at the top about that idea of what the definition of digital is, and also how we approach that idea of recalibrated. So it's, as we look back at this, I feel that we sort of recalibrated our culture insofar as working to change what we had, improving access, format shifting, but also, I guess, internally understanding what digital transformation, understanding what digital change might mean, redesigning the process, and that's really about embracing the change. So rather than just about understanding it, it's starting to really to get to grips with it, to understand what that change means as process change. But as we reimagine the business model, really what it's taken us to, I think, is the point of understanding that we need to not just embrace change, but to celebrate it, to understand that actually change is constant. It's not something that changes from A to B. It will constantly change all the time. And it may feel somewhat daunting, but once you have that mindset, it's actually quite liberating and, dare I say, quite enjoyable. Anyway, that's the gist of the presentation. I hope you enjoyed that. Kate.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And I certainly enjoyed it. I think my mind's exploding with the whole idea of being able to buy tickets to Sydney Opera House events on my Apple TV.
Yeah, it's one of these things where it happened quite quickly once we had identified that we were going to work with Vimeo as a partner. They had a product that it wasn't quite ready. It was ready as in terms of we could work with them to license it, but in terms of the work that we had to do behind the scenes, we took the view, and it's not necessarily a view shared by everybody, that we would sort of build the plane in the air a little bit, that it was more important for us to get to market and have this available for folks and work out a lot of the process behind the scenes as we were up there, which, isn't necessarily everybody's preferred approach, I understand. But I think we were going to come up against, a few speed bumps along the way anyway. So it was better to have, stream in market with people, interacting on the platform and renting things and so on, as we worked out some of those things behind the scenes. And I think, a year later, the majority of these things are probably now ironed out. And if we'd waited till now, we would have been a year behind, essentially. Yeah.
And the pandemic was so hard on the arts industry in general to be able to buy a ticket and support performers. It's a wonderful concept.
Yeah, and I think the whole industry, got behind that idea during the lockdowns, and we're by no means the only people doing it. Everybody from the small to medium sector in the arts was finding ways to do that. Whether it was just streaming something very simply using iPhones and online donation services in order to do it. But I think it meant that everybody working in the whole industry, had watched something online during the pandemic, and had their mind turned on to that idea. And, we're seeing certainly in the UK, who are a little bit ahead of us in terms of the sort of pandemic cycle, that not all, artists and organizations will continue this going forward, as they kind of snap back to previous practice, but a lot will, so I think, it won't just be a case of returning to, turning the screens off and returning to what it was before. We're sort of, we've now got a good pathway ahead to continue doing this kind of work.
So where is the balance for you? I mean, how do you make decisions about what goes to digital and what doesn't go to digital?
There's a really pragmatic one, which is around licensing. So there's if you think about things like I'm going to say Cinderella because it's one that is top of mind at the moment as I'm working through some licensing for it. I don't think we'll be able to license it because of the grand rights inherent in that and the rights of the artists who are on stage and so on. So there are some things that pragmatically we just can't do. But we also, I think, separate to everything we just talked about, or in parallel to everything we just talked about, we have an audience strategy. So the house has a really clear ambit for attracting particular audiences, and those that primarily don't attend the house at the moment. And so looking at who they are and programming a little bit to that. So when we discovered that the age of the audience was about 10 years younger, that sort of gave us a bit of freedom to say, well, we can program this work 10 years younger. We can put work up there that is perhaps less traditionally opera house and is a bit more in line with the 30 to 40 year old audience rather than the 50 plus audience. So that's very much top of mind as well.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know about everyone else, but I don't think I'll go back to the same level of travel as pre-pandemic either. So it's great to balance both of those things, digital and physical performances.
Yeah, we're hearing about this concept of artists, international artists performing digital tours. So essentially they'll stay where they are, but the live stream or the recorded work will tour from place to place and will be exclusively presented, either per country or by city. And we've done a couple of those where we've presented digital things that are so-called exclusive to Australia, if you like. So that'll be interesting to see how that evolves in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us to share today. I think that was a wonderful presentation, a perfect bookend to the keynote we started with today, who was talking about libraries as teleporters and time machines and really tied into that. So thank you. And I'm sure everyone will be checking out the app on Apple TV imminently.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks. We're just going to take a short break now for a couple of minutes before we come back with our final keynote speaker for the day. Thanks, everyone.